there is a secret that was buried for 1,000 years. Not in a tomb, not in a chest of gold at the bottom of the sea. It was buried in the way a Viking farmer spread fresh straw across his sleeping platform on a winter evening. In the way a Norse woman hung dried herbs above the hearth before the household grew quiet. In the way an entire longhouse full of people fell into a deep, unbroken, restorative sleep. While outside, the snow fell and the wolves moved through the dark forests of Scandinavia. The secret was not dramatic, it was not magic, but it was so profoundly effective that modern sleep scientists, armed with brain scans and sleep labs and decades of research, are only now beginning to understand what the Vikings already knew by instinct. And tonight, as you lie here and let the world grow quiet around you, we are going to travel back together. Back across 1,000 years. Back to the longhouses and the firelight. Back to a time when human beings slept in a way that our modern world has almost entirely forgotten. By the time this story is done, you will know something that most people never discover. You will understand the hidden secret that gave the Vikings, these fierce, wind-weathered, sea-crossing warriors, perhaps the most perfect sleep in all of human history. And you may find, as this story carries you gently toward your own deep rest tonight, that some of that ancient wisdom is already beginning to work in you. So settle in now. Let your body grow heavy. Let the day release its grip on you. And listen. To understand the Viking secret to sleep, you first have to understand the world they lived in. Not the world of raids and sagas and longships crossing storm-grey seas. That world existed, but it was only part of the picture. The other part, the part that mattered most for sleep, was the world of winter evenings in a Norse longhouse. Picture it now. The year is somewhere around 900 CE. The location is a farmstead in coastal Norway, not far from what we would today call Trondheim. The farmstead belongs to a family we will call the Haraldsson household. A farmer, his wife, their children, a few workers who live with them through the winter months. The longhouse itself is long and low, built partly into the hillside to keep out the cold. The walls are thick, timber and turf layered together, so dense that the sound of the wind outside becomes a distant whisper once you step inside. The roof is low overhead, dark with years of smoke. The central hearth runs almost the entire length of the building, a long trough of glowing coals that casts a warm amber light across everything it touches. Along the walls on both sides, raised wooden platforms stretch from one end of the house to the other. During the day, these platforms are seating. In the evening, they become beds. By the time darkness falls in winter, and in northern Norway, darkness can fall by 3 or 4 in the afternoon. The household has been slowing down for hours. The farmer, whose name is Halfdan, has been working since before dawn. He has mended a fence in the outer field, hauled wood from the forest edge, repaired a piece of iron equipment with the household's small forge. His wife, Sigrid, has spent the day grinding grain, spinning wool, managing the preservation of food stores. The children have helped with lighter tasks. Everyone in this household has moved their body through real, physical work, not exercise as we think of it now, as something separate from life, but as life itself. As the light fades, the pace of life in the longhouse changes. The fire is built up. The evening meal is prepared and eaten while it is still early. Perhaps 3 or 4 hours before anyone will sleep. After the meal, the family gathers around the hearth. Perhaps an elder tells stories. Perhaps someone sings quietly. The children begin to lean against each other, against their parents. Their eyes grow heavy. This is not an accident. Everything about this environment, the firelight, the warmth, the darkness outside, the quiet voices, the physical tiredness in every muscle, everything is pushing this family towards sleep in the most natural, biological way possible. No screens, no overhead lights, no notifications, no ambient anxiety about tomorrow's calendar. Just the fire, the dark, the warmth, the voices growing quieter, and soon, sleep. Modern archaeologists have excavated dozens of Viking longhouses across Scandinavia, Iceland, the British Isles, and even a settlement at Longhouses Meadows in Newfoundland, Canada. Proof that Norse people travelled far enough to reach North America 500 years before Columbus. What they have found at these sites is consistent. The sleeping platforms were real. The central hearths were real. The arrangements of the household were real. And from what they can piece together, from the pollen analysis, from the food residues in cooking vessels, from the positions of objects, from the written evidence of the sagas, they have begun to understand something remarkable. The Viking sleep environment was not primitive. It was, in many ways, ideal. The first element of the hidden secret is this: the Vikings lived in complete darkness. Not the partial darkness most of us experience when we turn off our bedroom lights. Not the kind of dark where a streetlight glows through the curtains, or where the router blinks blue in the corner, or where the phone screen pulses softly on the nightstand. True darkness. The kind of darkness that has almost entirely disappeared from modern life. Inside a Viking longhouse at night, with the hearth banked low, the interior was dim beyond what most of us can easily imagine. The fire produced light, yes, but it was the warm amber and orange light of glowing coals, not the sharp white light of electric bulbs. And it was dim. Archaeological experiments with reconstructed Viking oil lamps have measured their output at between 5 and 20 lumens. A modern LED bulb produces 800 to 1500 lumens. The difference is enormous, and it matters more than almost anything else for sleep. Here is the biological truth that modern sleep science has rediscovered, a truth the Vikings lived by instinct. Darkness tells your brain to sleep. Specifically, darkness triggers the production of a hormone called melatonin. Melatonin is produced by a small gland in the center of your brain called the pineal gland. When your eyes register darkness, the pineal gland begins to release melatonin into your bloodstream. Melatonin makes you feel drowsy. It lowers your core body temperature. It slows your thinking. It prepares every system in your body for the deep, restorative process of sleep. Modern humans suppress melatonin production constantly. Every overhead light, every screen, every LED, every city streetlight glowing through a bedroom window, all of it tells your pineal gland it is still daytime. Stay awake, stay alert. The Vikings experienced none of this. When darkness fell, it fell completely. Their melatonin surged. Their bodies began preparing for sleep, hours before they actually lay down. By the time a Viking farmer stretched out on his sleeping platform, his body had been building towards sleep for hours. His melatonin levels were high. His core temperature was dropping. His muscles were carrying the good, honest weight of a full day's physical work. He did not need to try to sleep. Sleep came to him like the tide coming in. There is a fisherman in the saga literature. The details of his character are drawn from multiple historical sources, whom we can imagine living near the coast of what is today Bergen, Norway. Let us call him Leif. In winter, Leif's day ends early. The sun sets in the mid-afternoon, and by the time he has returned from the water, cleaned his net, helped bank the fire, and eaten his evening meal, darkness has been in the world for hours. The longhouse where he lives with his wife and 3 children is almost perfectly dark. The hearth provides a low, warm glow. Shadows move gently on the walls. The smell of dried fish and burning wood and lanolin from the wool blankets fills the air. A modern sleep researcher who measured Leif's melatonin production would be astonished. Studies have shown that when modern people are removed from artificial light and exposed to natural light cycles for just 1 week, their melatonin production increases by 30%. Their sleep improves dramatically. Their natural circadian rhythm, the biological clock that governs when we feel awake and when we feel sleepy, synchronizes with the actual cycles of the sun. Leif lived this way every day of his life. His melatonin production was not 30% higher than a modern person's. It was, by all reasonable scientific estimation, optimal. His pineal gland worked the way it was designed to work, in the conditions it evolved to work in. And because of this one simple fact, because the world around him went genuinely dark when the sun went down, Leif lightly fell asleep faster, slept more deeply, and woke more rested than most people alive in the 21st century will ever experience. This is the first layer of the hidden secret. Darkness. Real darkness. The kind that wraps around you like water and pulls you gently down. Here is something that will change the way you think about your own nights. You are not broken if you wake in the middle of the night. You are not suffering from insomnia. You are not anxious. You are not doing something wrong. You may simply be human. And the Vikings knew this. They had a name for what happened in the night. In Old Norse, the language spoken across Scandinavia during the Viking Age, there were 2 words for sleep. Första sveffen, first sleep. Efter sveffen, second sleep. These were not metaphors. They were descriptions of what actually happened. What had always happened for most of human history, before the Industrial Revolution forced us to sleep in a single compressed block. The historian, A. Roger Ekirch, spent decades researching pre-industrial sleep across European history. He found hundreds of references, in diaries, in medical texts, in literature, in court records, to this same pattern of sleeping in 2 parts, with a waking period in the middle of the night. This pattern appears in ancient Roman writing, in medieval English documents, in early American records, and yes, in the Norse sagas. In the Grettis saga, one of the great sagas of medieval Iceland, the hero Grettir Asmundarson is described rising after his first sleep to tend to household matters before returning to his sleeping platform later in the night. In the Egil's saga, characters wake in the middle of the night for quiet conversation before returning to sleep until dawn. These were not unusual events worth recording because they were strange. They were mentioned in passing as ordinary, unremarkable parts of nighttime life because they were. Let us return to the Haraldsen household, that long house near Trondheim, on a winter night around the year 900. The household has eaten. The stories have been told around the fire. The children have drifted into sleep where they lay and been carried to the sleeping platform. The adults have followed. By 8 o'clock in the evening, the entire household is asleep. This first sleep lasts approximately 4 hours. Around midnight, give or take, several members of the household wake naturally. This is not disturbing to them. It is expected. It is part of the night. Halfdan, the farmer, wakes first. He adds wood to the central hearth, which has burned low. He checks that the animals in the adjacent byre, the section of the longhouse where livestock are kept through winter, are calm and warm. He drinks some water, perhaps some weak ale. His wife, Sigrid, wakes a few minutes later. She sits up in the soft glow of the newly fed fire. She picks up a piece of spinning she left near her bed. Her hands work quietly in the warm light, the rhythm of the work easy and familiar. 2 of the household workers wake and speak quietly in the far corner of the longhouse. Their voices are low. The sound mixes with the crackling of the fire, the breathing of the sleeping children, the soft sounds of animals settling. After perhaps an hour, perhaps a little more, the waking members of the household return to sleep. This is their second sleep. It lasts until dawn, or close to it. When they wake in the morning, they do not feel that their sleep was interrupted. They do not feel groggy or fragmented or unrested. They feel, by all accounts, genuinely restored. Modern sleep science has begun to understand why this pattern may actually be more natural for human beings than our modern consolidated 8 hours. The human body does not produce a single uniform wave of sleepiness across the night. It produces 2. The first wave, driven largely by what scientists call sleep pressure, the build-up of adenosine in the brain over the course of the day, comes in the early hours of darkness and produces deep, slow-wave sleep. This is the most physically restorative sleep, the kind that repairs muscles, consolidates memories, and regulates hormones. It is the sleep that leaves you feeling genuinely refreshed. After several hours of this deep sleep, the brain naturally cycles toward a lighter phase. Body temperature rises slightly. A period of heightened alertness occurs. The body is not ready for another full stretch of deep sleep immediately. This is the biological window for the midnight waking, and it is entirely normal. During this waking period, the body produces a surge of a hormone called prolactin. Prolactin is associated with calm, with contentment, with a sense of warmth and safety. People who experience this natural midnight waking often describe it as pleasant, a quiet, still peaceful kind of alertness, very different from the sharp anxiety of stress-induced waking. After this window, the body slides naturally into second sleep, lighter than the first, richer in the dream state sleep we call REM, and equally important for emotional processing and mental restoration. For the Vikings, living at northern latitudes, where winter darkness could last 16 to 20 hours in the far north, biphasic sleep was not merely natural, it was adaptive. Imagine trying to sleep for 20 hours straight. The biology of it would simply not allow it. But sleeping in 2 blocks of 4 to 5 hours, with a quiet, calm waking period between them, that works. That has always worked. And in that peaceful, prolactin-flooded waking hour in the middle of a Viking night, the longhouse became something remarkable. A place of quiet industry, of gentle conversation, forming of intimacy between couples, of craftwork done by firelight, of prayers offered to the Norse gods in the velvet darkness, a time that was neither fully awake nor fully asleep, but something softer and more human than either. The reason this matters for you, lying here tonight, is this. If you wake in the middle of the night, if you find yourself alert and calm at 2 in the morning, wondering why sleep has left you. You are not broken. You may be experiencing exactly what your ancestors experienced. The Vikings did not have a word for the panic we feel about middle of the night waking. They had no concept of insomnia as a disorder. The night was simply the night, with its first sleep and its second sleep, and the quiet time between. When you stop fighting that waking, when you stop filling it with anxiety about not sleeping, you allow yourself to experience what a Viking woman experienced, sitting in the warm firelight with her spindle, completely at peace with the night. And from that peace, second sleep returns. It always has. It always will. There was a woman in a settlement near what is today Roskilde, in Denmark. The sagas do not give us her name. She lived in the margins of history, as healers often do. But archaeology has found her. Or rather, has found someone very like her. At a site excavated near Lesra, archaeologists uncovered the dwelling of what appears to have been a healer, a woman of some status, whose home contained dozens of specialized containers, clay vessels, wooden boxes, and leather pouches, along with the preserved remains of numerous medicinal plants. Among those remains were seeds and plant materials identified as valerian root, hops, linden flowers, chamomile, all of them plants with documented scientifically verified effects on sleep. This woman, this unnamed healer in 10th century Denmark, knew something that modern pharmacologists spent the 20th century rediscovering. She knew which plants made sleep come easier. She knew how to brew them, how to combine them, how to administer them. She was, in the most precise sense, a sleep scientist. She simply worked with roots and flowers instead of molecules. Let us call her Thora. On a winter evening, a young farmer's wife comes to Thora's dwelling. The woman has not been sleeping well. The harvest was difficult. Her husband has been away for weeks. She lies on her sleeping platform at night, and her mind circles and circles, unable to find rest. Thora listens. She asks questions. She examines the woman's eyes, her skin, the quality of her voice. Then she moves to her shelves. She selects dried valerian root, thick, brown, pungent with an earthy, almost unpleasant smell. She adds dried hops, flower heads that smell faintly sweet. She adds a handful of dried linden blossoms, small and pale. She thinks for a moment, then adds a spoonful of dried chamomile flowers. She places these in a clay pot with water and sets it to heat on her small hearth. While it heats, she speaks quietly. She tells the young woman about sleep, about how the night has its own wisdom, about how the body knows what to do if you let it. When the brew is ready, she strains it into a small bowl. She sweetens it with a spoonful of honey. Honey is precious, used sparingly, but Thora knows that a touch of sweetness makes the medicine easier to receive. She adds something else, perhaps. A word spoken over the bowl. A small gesture that in her tradition carries the weight of protection and healing. The young woman drinks the preparation warm, sitting by Thora's hearth. That night, she sleeps. Modern science has confirmed, in careful and rigorous studies, that these plants work. Valerian, Valeriana officinalis, contains a compound called valerianic acid that acts on GABA receptors in the brain. These are the same receptors targeted by benzodiazepine medications like Valium, but without the risk of dependency. Multiple studies have shown that valerian reduces the time it takes to fall asleep and improves the quality of deep sleep. Hops, Humulus lupulus, contain a compound called methylbutanol that has demonstrated sedative effects. Combined with valerian, hops have been shown in clinical trials to significantly improve sleep quality. Linden flowers from the tilia tree, sometimes called lime flowers, contain flavonoids with mild anxiolytic effects. Linden tea remains a popular sleep remedy in Scandinavian folk medicine to this day. Chamomile, Matricaria chamomilla, contains a compound called apigenin that binds to the same benzodiazepine receptors as valerian. Studies have confirmed that chamomile improves sleep quality, particularly in people experiencing mild anxiety. These are not folk remedies that science has debunked. They are folk remedies that science has confirmed. Thora knew what she was doing. She knew it the way knowledge lives before it becomes formal. In the hands, in the nose, in the accumulated wisdom of generations of women who had watched and experimented and learned. But here is what is perhaps most important about Thora's sleep preparations. They were not a cure for a broken sleep system. They were a gentle support for a sleep system that was already working. Unlike modern sleep medications, which are often used to force sleep in environments that work against it, in bodies made anxious by screens and stress and artificial light, in schedules disconnected from any natural rhythm. Thora's herbs worked in concert with everything else the Vikings already had. The darkness, the physical exhaustion, the communal warmth of the longhouse, the quiet hour between first and second sleep. The herbs were the final gentle push, like a boat already pointed at the shore, given one last push by a quiet hand. The archaeology of Viking herb use is rich and consistent across sites. At Jorvik, the Viking settlement that became the city of York in northern England, excavations in the 1970s and 1980s found preserved seeds and plant materials, including valerian, hops, and linden. Similar finds have emerged from excavations in Dublin, in Hedeby, the great Viking trading centre in Denmark, and at sites across Scandinavia. In the 13th century, the Lægebog, a Danish medical text that preserves much older knowledge, contains detailed instructions for herbal sleep preparations, remarkably similar to what modern herbalists would recommend today. The specifics of the plants, the methods of preparation, the timing of administration. This knowledge did not spring fully formed from nothing. It was inherited, learned, accumulated over generations. The healer Thora was not inventing something new. She was practicing something ancient. If you are lying awake tonight, feeling the edge of wakefulness, keeping you from rest, imagine Thora's preparation. Imagine the smell of it, warm and earthy and slightly sweet. The clay bowl warm between your palms. Imagine the simple wisdom in it, that the body wants to sleep, and that gentle plants can remind it how. Modern versions of these preparations are available in most health food stores. Valerian capsules, linden tea, chamomile tea, hop extract. The Vikings did not have the luxury of a tea bag, but they had the plants themselves. Thora would recognize them immediately. She would not be surprised that they still work. She would only be puzzled that we forgot. There is a quality of sleep that has almost entirely disappeared from modern life. It is not something you can measure on a sleep tracker. It cannot be found in a supplement or a special pillow or a weighted blanket, though weighted blankets try to approximate it. It is the feeling of sleeping surrounded by people you trust. The Vikings slept together, not in the romantic sense, though that too was part of it, but in the most fundamental, communal, human sense. Entire households shared their sleeping space. The sleeping platforms that ran along the walls of a Viking longhouse were continuous, not separate beds, not individual rooms, one shared surface, covered in straw and wool and furs, where a family and their workers, and perhaps a few guests, all slept together in the warm amber darkness. At Stung, a remarkably well-preserved Viking farmstead in Iceland, archaeologists uncovered a longhouse with raised platforms along both long walls. The platforms measured approximately 2 meters wide, enough for multiple people to sleep side by side. Similar arrangements have been found at Jorvik in England, at Lons o Meadows in Newfoundland, at sites across Scandinavia, Iceland, and the Norse settlements of Ireland and Scotland. This was not poverty. High-status households slept this way too. The chieftain's longhouse at Borg in Lofoten, Norway, a large and evidently wealthy establishment, shows the same communal sleeping arrangement. The difference between a poor household and a wealthy one was not whether you slept alone or with others. It was where on the sleeping platform you lay. The head of the household and his wife slept closest to the central hearth, in the warmest spot. Lower status members slept towards the colder ends. Status was measured in warmth, not in walls. There is a science to this. Human beings are not naturally solitary sleepers. We evolved over hundreds of thousands of years sleeping in groups. The isolated individual bedroom, the private sanctuary of sleep that modern Western culture considers the baseline of civilized life, is historically anomalous. It appeared only gradually, first among the very wealthy in the late medieval period, and spread to ordinary households only in the last few centuries. Before that, people slept together, and modern research is beginning to understand why this may have been better for sleep. A study published in the journal Sleep Health found that people who reported stronger social connections experienced measurably better sleep quality. The physical proximity of trusted others during sleep appears to reduce the brain's vigilance system, the deep, ancient alarm network that keeps us from falling into truly deep sleep when we feel exposed or at risk. When you sleep among people you trust, your brain registers safety. And in that safety, it can let go. It can stop scanning, stop listening, stop holding just a fraction of its attention on potential threats. It can sink into the deepest, most restorative layers of sleep. Consider what it was like to be a Viking child. You were never alone at night. From your earliest memories, the night meant warmth and people. It meant the sound of your parents' breathing, the shifting of your siblings, the low conversation of adults in the darkness between first and second sleep. It meant the glow of the hearth, never fully extinguished, always tended. Sleep was not something you faced alone. It was something you entered together. Modern sleep researchers who study co-sleeping cultures have found consistently that children in these cultures experience fewer sleep disturbances and develop healthier associations with sleep. They do not fear the night the way many children in isolated bedroom cultures do, because the night, for them, is not a place of separation. It is a place of belonging. In the Grettir saga, the great outlaw Grettir Asmundarson, one of the most famous figures in Norse literature, is exiled from Iceland and forced to live alone in the wilderness for years. Among the things the saga specifically mentions that he misses, sleeping among household members, not feasts, not fine clothing, not the company of warriors, the simple comfort of sleeping in the presence of others. This is not a small detail. It is a profound one. It tells us that in Viking culture, communal sleep was not merely practical. It was understood as one of the genuine goods of a settled, connected life. To be deprived of it was to be impoverished in the truest sense. We have forgotten this. We have built our lives around the assumption that privacy in sleep is normal, even necessary. We close our bedroom doors, sleep alone, and wonder why we sometimes feel a low, wordless anxiety in the night. Perhaps what we feel is older than we know. Perhaps it is the brain's ancient recognition that something is missing. Perhaps it is the echo of the longhouse, and the fire, and the sound of people who love each other breathing in the warm dark. The Viking diet would look strange to modern eyes. Not luxurious, not varied in the ways we are accustomed to, but in ways that modern nutritional science is only beginning to fully appreciate, deeply, specifically, almost precisely suited to supporting the kind of deep, restorative sleep that the Vikings apparently experienced. Let us eat an evening meal with Halfdan the farmer and his family. The meal is prepared while there is still light. Winter light in Norway. Thin and grey, fading fast. By the time they sit down to eat, it is probably 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The centerpiece of the meal is barley porridge, thick, warm, cooked with water, and enriched with a little rendered fat. It is served with smoked herring, fish that has been preserved through the winter in layers of salt and smoke. There is dried bread made from rye, dense and slightly sour. There is skyer, a thick, fermented dairy product similar to what we would call yogurt, tangy and rich with protein. There is a cup of weak ale, low in alcohol, brewed from barley and herbs. That is the meal. And from the perspective of modern sleep science, almost every element of this meal is actively beneficial for sleep. Barley, the most important grain in many Viking communities, is rich in tryptophan. Tryptophan is an amino acid that serves as the biochemical precursor to serotonin and then to melatonin. Your brain needs tryptophan to make the hormones that govern sleep. Barley also provides magnesium, a mineral that modern research has identified as critical for sleep quality. Magnesium activates the GABA system, the same calming neurotransmitter system targeted by valerian root and by prescription sleep medications. Magnesium also relaxes muscles and nerves. The Vikings ate barley every day. Fatty fish, herring, mackerel, salmon, cod, all documented as staples of the Norse diet through analysis of food residues at archaeological sites, are among the richest dietary sources of omega-3 fatty acids. Multiple studies have now linked omega-3 consumption to improved sleep quality, particularly improvements in deep, slow-wave sleep. They are also rich in vitamin D, another nutrient linked in research to sleep quality. People with low vitamin D levels consistently sleep worse than those with adequate levels. The Vikings, especially coastal communities, ate fatty fish constantly. Skyer and fermented dairy, the fermentation process that transforms milk into skyer, increases its GABA content. GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid, is the brain's primary inhibitory neurotransmitter. It is the chemical signal that tells neurons to calm down, to slow their firing, to ease into rest. A cup of warm skyer in the evening was, from a neurological standpoint, one of the most effective sleep preparation foods a human being can consume. Rye bread, sourdough fermented, the fermentation process reduces phytic acid content and increases the bioavailability of sleep-promoting minerals, particularly zinc and magnesium. But perhaps the most important element of the Viking evening meal is not what it contained. It is when it was eaten. The Norse ate their last meal several hours before sleep, not because they had read studies about it, but because the light dictated it. You cooked and ate when you could see. When darkness fell, you stopped. Modern research has consistently found that eating close to bedtime, particularly high-fat or high-protein meals, disrupts sleep architecture by keeping the digestive system active during the early hours of sleep, delaying REM sleep onset, and reducing sleep efficiency overall. The Viking practice of finishing their last meal 3 to 4 hours before sleep allowed digestion to be substantially complete before the first sleep began. The body, by the time Halfdan lay down on his sleeping platform, was not occupied with digestion. It was free to sleep. There is a kind of tiredness that modern life rarely produces. Not the mental exhaustion of screens and emails and decisions and noise. Not the shallow, wired tiredness of too much caffeine and too little movement. A different kind. The tiredness of a body that has genuinely worked, that has lifted, carried, rode, walked, chopped, hauled, built, that has spent hours in cold air, in natural light, doing physical things with its muscles and bones and breath. The tiredness that does not fight sleep. The tiredness that is sleep, already beginning in the muscles, already lowering the eyelids, already slowing the heartbeat before the person even lies down. The Vikings had this tiredness every day. Analysis of Viking skeletal remains tells a clear story. The bones show high density, the result of sustained physical loading throughout life. The muscle attachment points are large and prominent, indicating the regular, vigorous use of major muscle groups. Male skeletons show the distinctive asymmetrical development of the arm and shoulder muscles associated with regular rowing. Female skeletons show the muscle attachments of grain grinding, textile spinning, butter churning. Even high-status individuals, those buried with gold and weapons and fine goods, show these physical markers. Physical work was not a mark of low status in Viking society. It was simply life. Experimental archaeology projects, where modern researchers attempt to build Viking structures using period-appropriate tools and techniques, have shed remarkable light on the physical demands of Norse life. One such project, undertaken by a team attempting to build a modest longhouse using Viking-era methods, found that hauling and placing the heavy roof timbers was equivalent to a modern strength training session. Just to build the house, then consider the ongoing labor of maintaining it, the farming, the fishing, the hauling of water and wood, the grinding of grain, the daily rowing that was primary transportation for coastal communities. Modern estimates, based on archaeological evidence and experimental archaeology, suggest that Viking farmers and craftspeople regularly expended between 3,000 and 4,000 calories per day through physical activity alone. The average modern office worker expends 300 to 600. The difference is tenfold. Modern sleep research has been unambiguous on this point. Physical activity improves sleep. Specifically, it increases the proportion of slow-wave sleep, the deepest, most physically restorative stage, and reduces the time it takes to fall asleep. But the type and timing of physical activity matters. Morning and afternoon exercise has been shown to most effectively enhance sleep quality. Evening exercise, intense exercise close to bedtime, can delay sleep onset by raising core body temperature and cortisol levels. The Vikings, whose work was dictated by daylight, naturally performed their most physically demanding tasks during the day. As evening approached, work naturally transitioned to lighter activities: fine woodworking, storytelling, food preparation, quiet conversation. This natural tapering of physical exertion in the hours before sleep is precisely what modern sleep researchers recommend. The Vikings did it not because they read the research. They did it because the sun told them to. Think of Gunnar, a shipbuilder from coastal Norway. His day begins before full light. By dawn, he is at work, rowing to gather materials, lifting heavy timbers, operating hand tools for hours. His muscles work in the cold, salt air. His lungs fill with sea wind. The sun tracks across the sky above him, low and pale in winter. By late afternoon, the light is going. Gunnar's hands move now to finer work. The carving of a detail, the checking of measurements, the planning of tomorrow's labor. His body is cooling. The deepest tiredness is already in his legs, his shoulders, his lower back. When he reaches the longhouse and the warmth of the hearth, when the evening meal is set before him and the fire throws its amber light across the wooden walls, his body is already halfway to sleep. He does not lie awake, worrying. He does not need to wind down with television or scrolling through a device. His body has been winding down for hours, naturally, the way bodies evolved to do. He lies on his sleeping platform, pulls the heavy wool blanket over himself, and in minutes, in the safe darkness, in the warmth of others, with the valerian tea, Sigrid brewed still warm in his stomach, he is gone now. The final layer of the hidden secret is perhaps the most difficult to understand from a modern perspective, because it is not a technique. It is not a supplement or a practice or a method. It is a way of being. The Vikings were not anxious about sleep. They did not lie awake monitoring themselves, wondering if they were sleeping correctly, calculating how many hours they had left before the alarm would sound. They did not have the modern concept of insomnia as a disorder, a failure of a system that should work automatically, a brokenness to be diagnosed and treated. Sleep was simply part of life, like eating, like breathing, like the turning of the seasons. It came when it came, and it almost always came. The Havamal, the words of the High One, a collection of Norse wisdom poetry attributed to Odin himself, contains a verse that has always struck modern readers as unexpectedly insightful about sleep. The unwise man is awake all night, pondering everything over. When morning comes, he is weary in mind, and all his troubles are just as they were. This is not a modern, cognitive behavioral therapy script. This is a 1,000-year-old Norse poem, and it is saying, with remarkable precision, exactly what modern sleep psychology has confirmed, that anxious rumination at night does not solve problems. It only exhausts the ruminator, while leaving the problems untouched. The Viking cultural wisdom around sleep was not about optimization. It was about acceptance. Rest is necessary. The night is for rest. Worry is a poor companion in the dark hours. These were not revolutionary ideas in the Longhouse. They were simply obvious. The Norse also had a relationship with fate, with what they called word. The sense that some things are simply how they are, that human agency exists within limits that cannot be pushed through by will alone. This was not passivity. Vikings were famously active, decisive, willing to travel enormous distances and take enormous risks in pursuit of their goals. But they also knew when to let go. Research in sleep psychology has consistently found that acceptance-based approaches to pre-sleep anxiety are more effective than problem-solving approaches. When we lie in the dark trying to think our way out of our worries, when we run through scenarios and plans and contingencies, we keep the brain in an active, alert state that directly opposes sleep. But when we acknowledge the worry, Name it, and then let it go for the night. This can wait until morning. Morning is soon enough. The brain can begin to quiet. The Vikings, who lived with genuine dangers that no amount of nighttime worrying could resolve, seem to have developed a cultural wisdom around exactly this. The sagas are full of characters who act decisively during the day and sleep soundly at night, not because they had no problems, because they knew that the night was not the time for problems. There was also the matter of story. Every evening, in a Viking longhouse, as the household gathered around the fire after the meal, stories were told. Not interactive entertainment. Not something requiring decisions or reactions. Just stories, told in a low voice, slowly, into the warm and darkening air. The sagas themselves, those great Norse narratives of heroes and ancestors and mythological beings, were almost certainly transmitted this way, in the evening hours, by firelight. And there is something deeply, neurologically, right about this. The brain processes stories differently than it processes problems. A story pulls attention forward, what happens next, but in a passive, receiving way. The listener does not have to do anything. They only have to listen. This is a transition state, a narrowing of consciousness from the full alertness of the day towards something softer, more interior, a loosening of the grip the conscious mind keeps on the world. Modern sleep research published in the journal Sleep Medicine has found that pre-sleep passive engagement, listening to stories being read to, improves sleep onset and quality compared to problem-solving activities or interactive media. The Vikings were being read to every night by the fire, by the human voice, by the oldest technology in the world. And as the story unfolded, and the fire burned low, and the darkness wrapped around the longhouse, and the first heaviness of sleep began to descend, they simply closed their eyes, and the story became a dream. The fire has burned very low now. Outside, the wind moves through the dark, and somewhere far off, the sea is speaking its old language against the rocks. Inside the longhouse, everyone is asleep. Halfdan and Sigrid, close together on the sleeping platform, her head against his shoulder. The children in a warm pile near the center of the space. The household workers, quiet at the far end. The darkness is complete and gentle. The room smells of wood smoke and wool and the earth of the longhouse walls. No one is anxious. No one is monitoring their sleep. No one is wondering if they are sleeping correctly, or if they have slept enough, or if tomorrow will bring the terrible weight of a tired mind. They are simply sleeping, in the way that human beings slept for most of the history of the species, in darkness, in warmth, in the company of trusted others, in bodies genuinely tired from genuine work, in the quiet aftermath of good food, well timed, perhaps with the gentle assistance of a healer's herbs, and in the complete and simple acceptance that the night is for rest, and the morning is for everything else. But this is the hidden secret. It was not really hidden. It was in front of us, all along. We simply built walls around it. Walls of artificial light and anxious schedules and isolated bedrooms and screens that glow in the dark, until we could no longer see it. The Vikings did not know they were sleeping better than almost anyone in human history. They simply slept and woke and slept again. And in the morning, when the thin winter light came through the longhouse door, they rose and went back to the world with something many of us spend our whole lives searching for: the feeling of having truly rested. Let the longhouse grow quieter now. Let the fire settle into coals. Let the darkness hold you, as it has held human beings for 10,000 years, in the spaces between one day and the next. You do not have to do anything. You do not have to sleep correctly. You only have to let go. The rest, as the Vikings always knew, will take care of itself.